Mr. Peters, I would like to begin by introducing you to our audience first. You are a psychotherapist, an author, and you are the founder of the so-called Shared Crossing Project. You have also developed a series of programs that focus on the preparation for a conscious end-of-life experience and enable the exploration of the topic life after death. I'm really excited to talk to you today about shared death experiences and your book At Heaven's Door, what shared journeys to the afterlife teach us about dying well and living better. An amazing title, by the way. My first question is, since the term near-death experience is quite commonly known, shared death experience, not so much though. How would you explain a shared death experience to someone who has never heard of it?
Yeah, great question. The shared death experience and the near death experience are almost identical in terms of phenomenological features. So, for those people who know about the NDE, near death experience, they basically have a good understanding for the phenomena that are possible in the shared death experience. A primary difference, of course, is that in a near death experience, the experiencer is actually having a brush with death or is under some sort of psychological stress that's inducing this vacating of their body, so to speak. In the shared death experience, the shared death experiencer is somehow getting a peek into what a dying loved one typically is experiencing during their transition from this human existence into the initial stages of the afterlife. And there are different degrees of experience, if you will. We call this participation or modes of participation. Some are quite deep in the sense that the shared death experiencer will say that they're actually accompanying the dying in their progression. So they're witnessing all of these phenomena that once again would be quite similar in the near-death experience. So the most common phenomena we hear are seeing, for the SDE, it's seeing the deceased loved one. Over half of our research participants will say they saw their dying loved one, and they saw them in the afterlife, and they saw them progressing. Progressing is a big term here because what separates, some people say, well, how would you know this is different from an afterlife visitation or a pre-death vision or visitation? Well, proximity to death actually is one determinant. You don't have to be right at the time of death, but certainly in and around within a few hours, the most a day, we see these shared death phenomena emerge. But what's really we see more than anything else is that the SDE experiencer talks about seeing a journey. They have a sense that they are accompanying or witnessing or sensing their recently departed loved one on a journey. And they feel the sense of ascension, movement. They also see the deceased relatives. They'll also see elevated spirit beings. They'll also see the heavenly realms. We also see this sense of movement towards the light. So while in the NDE, the light is often the dominant feature because about 3/4 of all NDEs have a light that is defined as luminous and as the kind of the point to which all NDE experiencers are moving towards. Similarly, in the SDE, the light, when it's there, serves as the point to which the experiencer is watching the dying moving towards. But the light is not, I should say, the light is not as dominant in the SDE as it is in the NDE. We see it in about 1/4 of our cases. That's a little bit of an introduction. I can go on and say more. One thing about the SDE is, by way of definition, is that relationship is really key. The closeness and the connection between the SDE experiencer and the dying seems to be the conduit, if you will. It seems to be the glue or the bridge that allows the caregiver loved one to experience this transition with the dying.
Wow, thank you so much for this answer. It sounds incredibly interesting. I would love to talk about this participation later on. First, I want to progress with the cases. So you have investigated and documented over 800 cases of shared death experiences. I'm sure you came across some of them that were especially fascinating to you. Would you like to share some of your favorite ones?
Yes, I would. And I should say that we have 250 shared death experiences that we have deeply analyzed. We have many hundreds more that we've reviewed, but we haven't deeply analyzed. In other words, we haven't coded them for the features. It takes a while. We have a coding team that goes through and codes them for the features. But yeah, I have certainly heard many thousands of SDEs. They're actually far more ubiquitous than the general public is aware of, certainly in the modern world. I would say that's common for both North America and Europe, the more Western countries. Okay, but I'll share a case that is really emblematic of the cutting edge of the research. So early on, and I would say almost a decade ago, when I was more than a decade ago, but I was really starting to look at more of these cases and wonder, what are these? I was a near-death experiencer myself. I worked in hospice. I'd had these experiences. And then I started giving talks about these experiences, and people just started coming to me. And then we started a research project. And in the early days, we didn't really know, and I certainly didn't know, what's the breadth of the SD, what's possible. So I've already given the major features, or some of them. We can do it again. But one feature has emerged in the last 4 or 5 years that has really caught my attention. So we know that there are elevated spirit beings that can be called guides or guardians. But then I started to see something more pronounced in the appearance of a type of spirit being that I have given the term conductor, the conductor. And the way I came to learn about the conductor was, people would say they would either see or sense a force that was guiding the transition of their loved one across the threshold and into the afterlife. I started with my team to say, what if these guides or this guide is there all the time, and we just, in our research, haven't been asking about it? Because, in our research, we do open-ended, unstructured, semi-structured interviews. So we don't want to tell people, hey, was there a guide there? Because that would be leading them on. But now we're going back and reviewing our cases. And as we've been doing this, a case came to our attention about a year ago. Her name's Gloria. And she's, by the way, she's not in my book, because my book was based on cases, the first 167 cases we did. So Gloria came in, and Gloria tells a story like this. Her husband is dying of cancer, and they've moved a hospital bed into their living room. So you got a living room, a kitchen, it's kind of an open floor plan. And Gloria was very close to her husband, and they had talked openly about her husband saying, I want to show you, I want you to be with me. I want you to be with me through the transition. I want to show you as much of where I'm going, the afterlife, what have you. So they were very open, explicit, and inviting, if you will. So Gloria was well aware that her husband wanted her around for all of this transition for him. Well, about 4 or 5 days before her husband dies, Gloria describes being in the kitchen, which I said is just adjacent to the living room where the bed is. And she sees this tall light being appear in the kind of right at the edge of the kitchen and the living room. So he, and she did call it a he, appears right in between her and her husband. And when she sees this being, she describes it like this. She said, he had a light from within, and it was glowing outwards. And he had a silhouetted body that was kind of human, but also lacking in um, the specific appearance of appendages, like no arms and no legs. So kind of angelic, if you will, rounded out. Didn't have a clear face, but was light. And she said he was so big that when he moved around, he kind of went through or the door, the top of the door jambs, which are typically about 8 feet. So not 8 feet, 7 feet. So typically he would actually go right through it. So he was translucent. She referred to him as the tall one, and he was there in her mind, in her interpretation, preparing her husband for this journey, protecting her husband, and interacting with her in a certain way. And some of the ways that he interacted with her was that she said she would just be at the bedside. And this was in the last couple of days of his life. And all of a sudden, the tall one would be there. And she would feel his presence, and then she would just go to sleep. She'd be knocked out and go to sleep. And she thought that was kind of strange, that she would just be trying to be present to her husband, but then she would just feel this almost like, drug come out and just put her to sleep. So she realized later that she was also waking up quicker and waking up at important times to be of support to her husband. So in her interpretation, retrospectively, she thinks the tall one was not just guiding her husband in this process. She thinks the tall one was working with her so that she could get the requisite sleep necessary to be present for her husband at the right time. So finally, in the last few hours, the tall one woke her up, and she was present. And then very soon, quickly, she saw her husband go up this vortex, kind of the veil opening, and the tall one accompanying her husband, and in a certain sense, allowing her to be fully present and observe this. So this is the conductor. And I have a number of these cases. I mean, like, we think the conductor is going to be somewhere between, right now, between 20 and 50% of our cases. But like I said, the important feature to realize here, or characteristic of the conductor, is sometimes it isn't seen, it isn't visible, but that presence is felt. So there's one case, and I can tell you that's the growing edge of our research. And the reason why, for me specifically, as a psychotherapist who works in end of life and helps people in end of life and grief and bereavement as well, is that what if we as caregiver loved ones could develop the capacity to partner with, to coordinate with, to essentially work with the conductor to help give our dying loved ones the best end of life, the most graceful, the most conscious, the most loving transition possible. Gloria provides the North Star for what is possible. And what's important to know about Gloria is Gloria had no idea this was even possible. So what if we get more informed, more aware, and can develop kind of a relationship with this conductor function, this conductor role? It's a real grandiose stretch at this point. But in the years now, more than a decade of doing research, I have seen so much evolve and develop as we have asked these questions, as we've probed into the vastness of the SDE phenomena. I think it's possible.
Wow, that is really, really deep. Thank you for sharing. So you say it is quite common that some light beings are there to assist. Do people always describe them sort of the same, or are there differences?
Yeah, I love your question. Yeah, because in our first round of research, what we found was 17% of beings that appeared in for the shared death experiencer that they observed. They were elevated beings, obviously. When I say disincarnate in a certain way, it's not they didn't have bodies, they didn't have human bodies. So they would appear like this. They would appear as light beings. So sometimes they would just be, these light beings in the shape of, either human bodies, but typically without arms. They typically describe them as having long robes, white, that are glowing. Sometimes angels. Angels is really common, and the reason we hear about angels is sometimes they'll say that they saw wings. And sometimes, I'll give another case that's quite fascinating. This comes from Angela from the UK. She describes the death of her mother-in-law she's peering into the room and she sees two beings of light, both angelic, one large and one smaller. The smaller one seemed to be a little bit nervous and trying in a certain way to learn how to do what the big light being was doing, the big angel being was doing. But this angel being took, Angela describes having wings and coaxing, moving like this a little bit, coaxing the spirit of her dying mother-in-law out of her human body. And Angela says she actually saw the translucent replica of her mother-in-law's spirit soul rising out of the crown and ascending upwards, by responding to the coaxing of this large angel's gyrations with her wings. So there's an angel, and we do see this quite. Now, just to be clear, this would be a conductor, of course. This is another representation of the conductor. So we also see, so that would be the elevated beings. Sometimes there are groups, like in this situation with Angela, a big being and a small being. Sometimes we see almost what's been referred to as a council. There was a council of elders, and they're typically tall, slender, light, and they emit a sense of calm and wisdom. And you don't hear the term love as much as you hear this grandeur of they knew everything. Like they were powerfully wise beings. And so we also see women beings. We've also one case from Amelia as well, also from UK, just outside London. Her 13-year-old son was dying of cancer, and at the moment of his death, she called it, this beautiful lady appeared, and she was elegant and regal, and she did so much dance, but she moved so gracefully, and she was imbued with love and caring, and she was purposeful, and she had intention, but so she was moving deliberately. And then Amelia realized that when she woke up suddenly, her son was dead, and the woman that was there, she immediately knew, that beautiful lady, that beautiful woman was there to take my son, Tom, into the afterlife. And it was very comforting to her. So that's 17% we see in angels that way. But to answer to continue the question here, Alexandra, 13% of our experiencers report seeing deceased relatives. Now, these deceased relatives can appear in a variety of ways. Most of the time, they see some characteristic of them that clearly lets them know this is my dead mother, my dead grandfather, my deceased sibling. And they often appear younger and healthier. So whatever they died from, they don't have any of those remnants. They seem to appear in a way that represents them at the pinnacle of their beauty in their human life, that's recognizable to the shared death experiencer. These beings, too, sometimes can serve as the conductor. We've seen that a few times, not a lot, but There was one case of a woman, Elizabeth, who was dying here in California. Her daughter, Elizabeth, was at bedside, and she said, I saw this majestic figure descend upon my mother's body. He was tall, almost militaristic, like a Navy admiral, but he had a uniform on of sorts, was very deliberate, very intentional. This is what we see in the conductor, this type of a job to be done. And she said later, she goes, I thought it might have been my uncle, my mother's brother, who was a strong, assertive man, served in the British Navy, and had a great deal of esteem and wisdom and power. So anyway, that's the different ways. That's what we see in terms of beings that appear to the shared death experiencer.
Wow, very interesting. And I can imagine why those not always like visibly appear, because I think it would scare a lot of people. So that's why maybe most of them choose just the feeling of presence, because honestly, even if things like that might exist, seeing it actually is something completely different.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, because you can get, quite frankly, scared by these presences, and that's a question I often receive, as you've just kind of posed it to me, not so much as a question, but when it comes as a question, it sounds something like, what's the possibility that people see these beings or sense them, get scared, and return to their human body quickly, and therefore lose the opportunity to have the shared death experience? Because you need to have the capacity to stay in that dimension. You need to be attuned and connected and stable in that realm. I think this happens a fair amount. And when I work with people, just when I do a group and I describe this when I'm teaching, somebody will almost always raise their hand and say, when you shared about seeing that conductor, when my mother was dying, I felt a spirit show up in the room, and I got scared, and I left, or I popped out of my seat. Well, if you do something that energetically jarring, you're going to lose your connection or attunement with that space, with that dimension.
Wow. Something to think about. Mr. Peters, I would like to talk about this phenomena once again. We already spoke about it a little bit. Soul leaving the body. You have written about that in your book as well. Now, how common is that? And how do people describe it when they see the soul, the astral body, however you want to call it, leaving the physical body?
Yeah, we see that a minimum of 15% of the time. The reason I say I know that's our minimum. So here's the catch with this. Let's take a step back here. In our total research to date, 2/3 of shared death experiences happen remotely. That means they don't happen at bedside. About 36%, between 34 and 36%, happen at bedside. When we say at bedside, we mean the experiencer is in the room. They are able to glance at and see the dying. So 15% of all cases see the spirit leaving the body. So keep in mind, that would be about half of the at a bedside, a little less than half, maybe like 40% would see the spirit leaving body, or some remnant. Now, how does that look? That looks a lot of different ways. It looks sometimes like you see a translucent replica of the dying, typically rising out of either the heart, the third eye, or the crown, and it rises up like this. Sometimes it kind of lifts off horizontally. Sometimes it kind of scoops up and heads up more vertically. It also can be in the form of a membrane. So a little a lot less defined, almost circular, almost moving kind of globularly. It's like kind of rise that people describe a membrane that's just kind of like a blob that's moving up, and but they know what it is, and it sometimes has a light um, element to it. It can be glistening. Sometimes it looks like a ghost, especially if it's ghostly. Sometimes it looks like vapor rising off of cold water or a cold river in the morning, like they described as this vapor that took the shape of a human being. So there are a lot of different ways that this is described. What is important, though, is that the experiencer says, I saw, I felt, I sensed the spirit, soul, consciousness of my loved one rise out of their body and ascend. What can happen is that immediate ascension stops at the ceiling in the room.
Yeah.
We have many cases where they'll describe this spirit, if you will, now out of body, stopping at the ceiling, turning, and there's an interaction between the shared death experiencer, caregiver, loved one, and the recently departed in soul, spirit, disembodied, still in that space. And it's usually, it sounds something like this. I knew that my departed loved one was communicating with me, and what they were telling me is that I am well, I am experiencing love, I am so happy, I am out of my body, I'm experiencing euphoria. And there's one case that's really great like this. It's a Sally Light's case, and she was at her mother's bedside, and she talks about her mother kind of crawling up the side of the wall like a membrane, then stopping and just pouring love into Sally. She goes like, love was pouring out of her mother into her, and she was saying to her, "You were right. We survived human death, and it's beautiful and lovely, and I love you, and thank you for caring for me." And then she was gone. So this is what we see here. There's kind of connecting both what you experience when you see or sense the spirit leaving body, and then kind of what happens soon after that. There's often some really meaningful communication.
Well, really profound. What I'm wondering, this question just popped into my head. How many of those people who have experienced such a phenomena visually, how many of those were already spiritual? How many of those were already aware that things like that might exist? And is this a factor?
Yeah. So up until we published in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine and Omega, Journal of Death and Dying, and then, of course, the public book I wrote in 2022, nobody had any idea of these phenomena. Mm-hmm. Like everybody who reported in our first round of research, all 167, had no idea these phenomena were possible. So did they believe in an afterlife and the continuation of consciousness beyond human death? That's a good question. It's a question I wished we'd asked beforehand. What we did ask is in our research, our interviews, was how has this changed your view of death and dying? And the vast majority, 80 to 90%, basically reported that they believe that they now survive, that their loved one and themselves would survive human death, and that they'd be reunited again in a benevolent afterlife. So we know that. But maybe to get at your question of spirituality with our experiencers, we found that about 2/3 of our shared death experiencer interviewees had some sort of mindfulness practice. That could be prayer, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, even walks in nature, on a regular basis. Now, the question is, it was hard to figure out if people had these practices beforehand or that they started after. Because the experience is so profound. And it was interesting, you asked them that, and they'd say, well, I had some of that, but it's gotten stronger now. So these questions are hard to kind of nail down, certainly to meet the standards of rigorous research. So we're cautious about what we assert there. But yeah, I can say with certainty that of the 167 people we interviewed, only a handful would ever know very much about the SDE. If they did, they heard me talk about it, but their experience predated their exposure to me giving a talk. And so my talk awakened in them this experience, and then they called us to be interviewed.
Thank you. You talk about different types of shared death experiences too. What different types or common patterns are there?
The general typology we have is, which I've explained a bit already, is 1/3 of shared death experiences happen at bedside, roughly. 2/3 happen remotely. There are subcategories or subtypes for shared death experiences. There are variations in time. That means we have about 9% of SDEs will happen either, moments, hours, in very few cases, even up to a day in advance of the actual moment of death. About 14% will happen few, minutes, hours, up to a day or two, sometimes longer, with after the death of their loved one. So that's 23%, almost a quarter, will happen not exactly at the time of, medically determined human death, which is cessation of heart and brainwaves, or brainwaves, I should say. But we also have a gradual SDE. A gradual SDE is something that kind of continues over a longer period of time. So you'll be in this altered state of mind where you may be in a heavenly realm, or you may see a life review, or you may be in conversation with the conductor or other elevated beings. And these experiences can arise, then go away, and then you can find yourself back there again. So it's like you enter into this after this SDE experience dimension, and then you kind of go back to your own life for a bit, and then you're back there again. And that's about 4 or 5%. So it's very rare, not very rare, it's just not common. But, I had that when my father died, because when my father died, just about 20 minutes before he died, I saw my grandmother, deceased aunt, and my deceased grandfather. And then I sensed and felt the conductor. And then there was some commotion around the exact time my father died. And so I kind of came out of that state. And I also had my hand on his pulse, and his pulse stopped. So I woke up my eyes and I said, I think he's died. And my siblings and mother were there. And then everyone left the room because, within 20 minutes, my mother had said, he's gone. And, my siblings said the same thing. But I stayed with my father's body until the morticians came to collect his body. And about 40 minutes after he died, I was just, with his body alone and talking to him as if he was there and praying and wishing him well. And then all of a sudden, I saw life review. I went into this place, this other dimension, and all of a sudden I saw our entire life together. Not entire, but key snippets that I remember, some of which I remembered and some of which I did not remember. Like some of it, I could say, oh, that was in my memory. Some of it, I had no idea. That memory has never come to me before, but I know where that is. I kind of know that time frame. And so I kind of felt that either my father was giving that to me, or maybe the conductor, or some benevolent force was showing me these film snippets, if you will, these images of our life together. So you asked about type. So there's that's a gradual SDE I had my father. The second subtype is what we call multi-person. That means more than one person can share in the SDE. So you can imagine someone's dying and there's 3 or 4 loved ones at the bedside. Then more than one person has a shared death experience. They often have some same experience features, but they also have some different features as well. So in other words, maybe one of the loved ones will see a deceased relative. Someone else will say, oh, I had a life review. Or someone else will say, oh, I saw the light in the distance and I saw, dad moving towards it. So, and then someone can say, well, we were all felt the energy. That's really the most important thing is here. There's an energetic feeling. We all felt the sublime feelings. We all felt the strong energy. We all felt this sense of belonging and connectedness and otherworldliness. This is when it gets ineffable. And that feature, I should say, is common in about 36 to 38% of our cases. This sense of sublime feelings that are otherworldly and ineffable. That's one basic typology. But then we have this more evolved or more in-depth typology that I came up with because I really wanted to help experiencers know and other people know what this experience is. So we call this the mode of participation, and there's 4 of them. The most basic mode of participation is what is referred to as sensing at a distance. So you're not at the bedside. And by the way, these modes are not mutually exclusive, so you can have more than one of them. So in this type of experience, you sense some sort of dying phenomena at a distance. So you might feel or sense your loved one. You might have strong empathic feelings for the loved ones. What you don't have here is you don't actually see or witness the shared death and near-death phenomena that are associated with death, but you have strong sensations that lead you to believe something's going on here. And they tend to happen at the time or soon after the time of death of your loved one. Then you have a second mode of participation, which is witnessing or observing death-related phenomena. And these are the phenomena that we've already discussed about, heavenly realms, out-of-body experience, past life reviews, heavenly realms, seeing, elevated spirit beings, seeing deceased loved ones, a tunnel, moving towards the light, all this. If you have those, we call those witnessing or observing death-related phenomena. And that's mode of participation number 2. Mode of participation number 3 is accompanying the dying. And that's when you go with the dying, you progress on the journey, you see these same phenomena in modes of participation 2, but rather than just watching the phenomena from a static position, you're moving along and observing with the dying. The 4th and least common is what we call assisting and guiding. So the experiencer will say, it was like I was called into this dying, this transition of my loved one to assist or guide my loved one. And we see this in about 6% of our cases. But when it happens, it's profound, because I got one example that sticks out to me is Mark is in New Jersey, which is outside New York, in the East Coast of the United States. And he has just finished a week-long outdoor education training that he was teaching. So he's exhausted. So he's driving back to his home in the country, and he's in the passenger seat. His buddy is driving. And this is also interesting because he's in the passenger seat, and he's got, when you're in a passenger seat of a car and it's, in the evening and you're tired, you have a very open mind. You have a very open mind. We call this kind of flow state. Like he's just there, mind very open, very spacious. Well, his father is dying in a hospital in Canada, but he doesn't know that he's dying. He knows that he's in the hospital, but he doesn't know how close to death he is. So what Mark describes is he's in the passenger seat of the car, and then all of a sudden he finds himself with his father in another dimension, and his father's confused. And and Mark shows up, and Mark realizes instantly, oh my gosh, my father's died. He's there with me. He goes, Dad, I see you're confused. You know you've died. And he says, oh, that's what's happened. He goes, well, I can help you. You need to turn and go to the light. He goes, well, how? So Mark says he picks up his father and says, I'll take you. And so then Mark describes carrying his father, who he describes as being light as a waif. And his father was a big man. So he picks up his father and he carries him upwards. Once again, the theme of ascension and journey and progression are the elements we see that characterize this experience. So he carries his father upwards, and then in the distance, he sees Mark sees his grandmother, his father's mother, appear coming out of the light, out of an arch of glaring light. And Mark sets his father down, and his father goes into the arms of his mother, and Mark feels the love pouring out, kind of the weeping, the longing, the love requited, the connection. And then Mark sees his father's brother appear, Mark's uncle, and they all embrace. And Mark knows at this point that he's done his job. He's assisted his father in getting to where he needs. And then there's one last exchange between Mark and his father. His father turns back and says, thank you. I didn't know how to do this. Thank you for helping me. And then all three of Mark's relatives, father, grandmother, and uncle, rise up and go into the light and disappear. And Mark returns to his car ride. Okay, so there's the 4 modes of participation.
Wow, breathtaking. I mean, and it sounds so healing because there's a lot of pain around the topic death and so much trauma as well. But listening to stories like that show us that it can be different, right?
Well, yes, I think that's the primary mission of the Shared Crossing Project, which is to transform people's views of death and dying through raising awareness and educating them about these shared crossing experiences. The main one being the shared death experience, but there's other shared crossing experiences as well that happen in and around the time of death. And you're right. When the shared death experiencer has this experience, what they tell us is that they no longer fear death. They know their loved one's alive and well. They know death is easy. They want to get closer to death. They want to get more in relationship with death. They want to help people, family members, and others die with more ease. They want to share this profound experience they've had that lets them know that death is not to be feared. It's rather a beautiful journey. And I should say, these experiences also often come back with psychic abilities, intuitive abilities, and a desire to become more spiritual.
Wow. So it does change people permanently if they experience a shared death experience.
I think that's a good statement. I would agree with that. But I would say more of the permanent change, the positive transformation, can occur when they deliberately engage in processes of integration. And that's where my work comes in, and others that I've trained, and other transpersonal psychotherapists, quite frankly. We're trained in how to normalize these experiences, how to affirm these experiences, how to help people tap into their own personal teachings that they were receiving, their own personal learnings that they received from the SDE in this experience, and then how to take those learnings and integrate them into their lives. How can they live more in integrity with these experiences rather than have these profound spiritual experiences live somewhat outside of their life? We try to get them to bring these experiences into the center of their life and live knowing these are real, knowing that this is what is going to happen to everyone we know, including ourselves, at the time of death. How do you live your life with that wisdom? What changes? And it's hard Because when you have a shared death experience, like a near death experience, a lot of the material world becomes less interesting to you. Like there's no greater experience than you can have than this type of accessing this other world that is more real than our human existence. We hear that all the time, that this shared death or near death reality is more real than real. It is the ultimate reality, the substrate of reality. Our human existence lives inside of that. We're a blip on the continuum of our soul's existence. A human life is short relative to what the shared death experiencers say they've experienced in their shared death experience. So those are the profound benefits, and that's what we try and get people to live from.
Just to clarify, you have mentioned psychic abilities in combination with the shared death experience. What exactly did you mean by that?
People say that they become more intuitive. In other words, they seem to have sense, they sense more, they're more empathic with people. They have more of a sense of care. They seem to know when they need to be attentive with their loved ones, or they need to know when they need to slow down. They realize that their decisions about their life are more intuitive, heartfelt, and less rationally driven. And they feel like they have spiritual guidance. They feel often they state that they feel like they have spirit beings or guardians who are helping them, informing them. So these are all these, and then they also say that they have some ability to sense the future a bit, or future events. Not that they see them for sure, but they have a sense of like, I don't think it's a good idea for me to go there right now, or maybe it's not a good time to travel, or we really need to prepare in this way. So they feel like they're getting more information that is beyond their cognitive capacities and mental capacities.
Very interesting. Yeah, because it is quite common for near-death experiencers that they return with some sort of psychic abilities. And it's fascinating that this can also happen to some degree to a shared death experiencer.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Alexandra, because we're visiting the same realm. I mean, I think what the SDE and NDE research tell us is that they corroborate a similar dimension that awaits all of us humans at the time of human death, that the continuation of consciousness brings us into this space, which is not the same. It's just that it seems to that the possible features are the same within each of these. Everyone has a unique experience, but the landscape seems to be similar. The geography of this post-death landscape is the same.
Great. So we talked about the phenomena of the soul leaving the body. We talked about shared death experiencers coming towards a light source, experiencing a higher consciousness, or coming to a border that cannot be crossed. Are there any other phenomena, or would you like to elaborate on the commonness of these?
Yes. So the most common phenomena happens in about 51% of our cases, is that the experiencer sees the dying. And I think that's the piece that is the most important, is that the experiencer says, I saw the dying in the afterlife, and he, she, or they are happy and healthy and vibrant, and they're going to be okay. That's the most important thing. I think the good feelings, the sublime otherworldly feelings, which are about 36, 38%, people really have this huge energetic rush that stays with them for days, if not weeks. It's a euphoria, and it's energetic. That's profound. I mean, these experiences are ineffable. I mean, people will say, I just didn't have the words to describe it. we've talked about spirit leaving body. We've talked about the seeing the beings you can see there. Heavenly realms are very common. About 20% will say that they were in a beautiful altered space. There was more real than real, colors they never seen before. We also, another feature I haven't talked about is if you're in the bedside SDE. Raymond Moody was great. He's a colleague and really the first one to bring to attention the phenomena of the shared death experience. He actually coined the term, or at least popularized the term shared death experience in 2010. And he used this term, which I think is really brilliant. He says, people describe a change in the geometry of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Change in the geometry of the room. Well, what that really means is the time-space continuum goes away. So if you're at bedside, the walls will often drop away. The ceiling will lift off, and all of a sudden you're in a space that is heavenly, but you're still with the dying. So you're in a different space. So people describe hospital walls just dropping away, and they look into a beautiful heavenly distance, or they look up and they're in a solar system, a galaxy, and yet they're still with the dying. So it's a change in the geometry of the room. You're still in the room, but the room has lost all of its 3D characteristics. You are now in a fourth and fifth dimension. That's profound. So, yes, these features are spectacular. And when you experience them, the experiences come back wholly transformed and enlivened in a good way about all this.
Mm. Now, is it possible for someone who has, let's say, a terminally ill loved one, is it possible for someone to increase the chance of experiencing a shared death experience in order to consciously support the dying one? And if so, how can one increase this chance?
Yeah, beautiful question. So I smile because when I initially heard of the SDE through Raymond Moody in 2009, I realized I'd had many SDEs. When I worked in hospice, I had a number of these. And so when Raymond was presenting at a conference on the shared death experience, I went up to him afterwards and said, well, how much research is being done on this? He goes, none. I go, wow. And I said, well, I'm really interested in this because I've had these experiences and I think I can help people have them. And he looked at me and he said, well, we don't even know how they happen. So if you think you can help people have them, that would be a wonderful gift to people. Mm-hmm. So Raymond and I began our relationship, and we, partnered through the years, and now we teach together often. But my first effort was to teach people how to have these experiences. In 2011, 12, and 13, I started teaching people how to have these experiences. And the challenge was I would teach people these methods, and they're called the shared crossing protocols. But it required people to die to collect the data and the accuracy. And that wasn't happening as readily as we had, I don't want to say we hoped for this, but it made it difficult to catch the data. So oftentimes you teach people and they wouldn't have a death in their life for years. And then we lose contact with them. And then, but anecdotally, I know this. I can say for people who learn our methods that at least a quarter will have the shared death experience, and upwards of 50%. We're going to be doing a really big questionnaire for for our participants in our programs, as well as experiencers, as well as the control group. So we're going to get a lot more data on this. But I also know this is all anecdotally, that upwards of 80 to 90% of the people that I've trained, and this is a particular pathway, particular program I'll describe in a second, have some sort of what we call shared crossing experience. So when they do our training, by the way, when they do their training, they say, the training does a few different things. One, it teaches people about these experiences that they actually exist. So that means all these end of life phenomena that we call shared crossing. So pre-death premonitions, pre-death visions, visitations, terminal lucidity, shared death experiences, direct post-death communication, uh, post-death visions and visitations, other forms of after-death communication. All this we talk about. Then we take people through some psychospiritual processes so they can heighten their ability to have these experiences. A lot of this is psycho-emotional, spiritual work, meditations, guided visualizations. All this is to kind of free the soul spirit from the confines, the weights, the gravity of the human body on the soul spirit. And then I teach the protocols, which is basically a series of exercises where I teach the dying the landscape that they will experience, the spiritual landscape they'll experience at the time of death. And that's a whole nother teaching about what they go through, what they'll see, what they'll sense, what they'll feel. It's kind of like the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Bardo states, but I've modernized it and westernized it so that it makes sense. Because I know the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I've worked with that, but it's very esoteric for the Western mind. So I put it into the Western mindset and added some other features as well, because some parts of the Tibetan Book of the Dead I don't understand myself, even though I have a Buddhist practice. I don't understand some of the significance of certain devas and mandalas and some of that stuff I don't quite understand so well. But I've seen it all in my own research and my own experiences, because I've had a couple dozen of these SDEs, so I know the landscape. So we teach the landscape, and then we teach the dying how to recognize that they've died and how to turn back and call their departed loved ones to join them in the afterlife, so they can show them where they are, that they're safe and that they're happy and experiencing love. And then we teach the surviving loved ones how to be receptive, how to attune, and how to receive the invitation to go with the dying into the afterlife, initial stages. So that's a pathway program. If your listeners are interested, we now teach it online. And it's a beautiful program. People really like it. We teach it over 3 days. It's an intensive. And there's information on our website. But the accuracy of that program is pretty high. I can say anecdotally that 80 to 90% of our participants will experience some profound end-of-life experience, whether it's an SDE, whether it's the visitation of a loved one after they die, whether it's a profound synchronicity that just blows their mind, like, a bird that shows up every day and sits on the porch this is the experience of a man and a woman, a husband and a wife. The wife dies, and every morning they used to have tea, and there's this bird that shows up every morning and knocks on the window, and the husband says, "I know that's my wife. This is where we gathered every day to have tea." So these are extremely meaningful. And then this gets into another way in which psychotherapists like myself work with SDE experiencers in grief and bereavement, and anybody in grief and bereavement. We call this line of work continuing bonds. It's that methodology in grief and bereavement therapy that supports an ongoing relationship between the bereaved, the surviving loved one, and the departed loved one. And we encourage that relationship, and we allow them to integrate these profound experiences, these after-death communications or shared crossings, into their understanding of the relationship they can have now with their departed loved one. And it's very meaningful. So why should we, when our loved ones die, why should we say, that's it, move on? Why can't we say, no, the relationship continues, but we can also have other relationships as well?
Yeah. Thank you for offering this opportunity to people to bring them closer to this topic. It might be very, revolutionary and changing for many people.
I hope so. Yeah. That's our hope, is that we can really radically transform our relationships, both culturally and individually and familially, to end of life, death, and dying.
Yeah. I feel like we are now able to finally combine spirituality and science rather than seeing them compete against each other. And this is amazing because most of us people still want and need some kind of evidence for all of these amazing experiences people have. Did you come across some cases that could look like proof, like literal evidence, because they simply cannot be explained rationally?
That's a great question. I'm just kind of thinking about that. But I want to answer something or respond to something you said that I thought was really wise, a comment on your part. And that is that this coming together of physics with what we're learning about these spiritual experiences at the end of life, shared death experience being one of them, near death experience being another. And that is this, the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be destroyed nor created. It can only be transformed or transmuted into another presentation or form. So what the shared death and near death experience tell us, they give us evidence for this, that yes, there's no longer the human being dies, and there's no real energy in that human body anymore. But there's a different presentation of that energy in a different way now. And it's in the invisible world, but there's a relationship that's being felt and sensed that's very much alive. In other words, you ask shared death experiencers and near death experiencers, where are these people that have left? Oh no, I sense them. They're just not in the physical form. That energy has been transformed. They've dropped their human body, but that energy is now alive and well somewhere else. So yes, you asked for evidence of a shared death experience.
Yeah, something like pre-death dreams, for example. That seems kind of like, okay, how could this possibly happen if you the night before or the hour before the death occurs already know? Or we mentioned it earlier, cases where multiple people were involved. So it cannot just be simple imagination.
We do have the multiple person SDE when it's in different locations, definitely provides some level of veridical evidence. Well, let's use the simplest one. This is from Allison. Allison is in California shopping. She's shopping, and all of a sudden, she senses and sees eventually her friend in London, outside London. And her friend comes to her, and well, she says that she hears her friend say, I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave, but I'm okay. I love you. Thank you for being such a good friend. So Allison is shopping. And as she's shopping, buying some stuff, she starts, then she goes to the checkout counter. She's having this whole experience going on. She walks out to her car, and she's walking out to her car. She gets a phone call and she looks at it and she goes, oh, I know who this is. She goes, this is somebody calling me to tell me that my friend has died because I just saw her. She told me she died. She picks up the phone, opens it. She goes, I just wanted to let you know. And Allison interrupts. She goes, I know. Sherry died. She goes, yes. How did you know? She goes, she just came to me to tell me she was okay and to say goodbye. So that's veridical. Now that's firsthand. In other words, that's self-reporting. So just so we know, so many of your viewers, since you have, a pretty sophisticated viewing audience, will say, well, that's reporting. That's self-reporting. Well, it is. And that's the difficulty we have, is that we can identify these patterns, but they're all self-reported. Like we don't have it's hard to corroborate doing kind of a control group, if you will. It's just hard to do this. So, but yeah, but I think I always say, because we get research grants and such and do good research. But really, what I say, because the research community, medical sciences in particular, can be pretty um, skeptical, and they can say, "Oh, it's wish fulfillment," or they're just imagining, and also, or they're delusionary, or they're having grief hallucinations. Oh, we've heard it all. Um, and you can say that I'm pretty, stalwart in my position that these are real. They happen. People don't make them up. They happen in the minds of people who did not know of the shared death experience. And they're even a bit fearful to share these experiences because they're afraid of getting labeled as, less than healthy in mind and body. So, like psychotic or delusional, what have you. But I say this: for the reasonable human being who lives their life every day, when they have these experiences and they know they're real, more real than real, and they share them with others, and they read the evidence that we have put forth, the cases, the patterns we've identified, the now many hundreds of these cases. And when they hear the experiencers of themselves tell their stories, it's pretty hard for a normal, practical, pragmatic, open-minded person to say, there's not something happening here. It's pretty hard for you to say, they're making this stuff up. No. These experiences happen. And as we continue to research them, we will come up with many thousands and thousands of experiences, and more people will share their stories, and they'll get normalized in our culture, all of our cultures. It is really the Western mind that struggles to make sense of this. I lived in Peru and Guatemala and Brazil, and often in relationship with indigenous peoples. For indigenous people, this is not hard to understand. There's no resistance because they journey all the time. They journey as part of their way of life. It's not even a spiritual practice for them. It's the way that they live. Journeying to other dimensions is part of living here. Well, death in their mind is the ultimate journey. It's the journey from which one does not return. And so most pre-modern cultures have a place for the SDE in their understanding of what happens at the end of life. It's the moderns. We're a rather recent development in the course of human history that is far more located in the brain than most previous cultures who could sense and feel and intuit, and we're more spiritual in nature, if you will.
Thank you for this amazing answer and this great example of a pre-death vision. I'm very interested to know about the post-death visitations too. Are they common, and is there a typical time frame when they occur, or can they happen a year after passing?
So most people are familiar with the term of after-death communication. That's any type of communication that happens post-death. Bill Guggenheim wrote a really, really wonderful public book called Hello from Heaven. And then there's been a lot of research about this. In fact, I now know that there's over 50 research articles peer-reviewed on after-death communication that verify that these experiences happen. So, but I'm most interested and have pointed the research of the Shared Crossing Research Initiative at the experiences that happen within the first year. And of those experiences, there is the first type that comes up is what I've called the direct post-death communication. And that comes up really soon after the death of a departed loved one. And what I hear and what our researchers hear and our team is that the surviving loved one will say, it was like I was asking a question in my mind or thinking about something. And my recently departed loved one, popped into my mind. And I didn't even know I was asking that question or thinking about this. But my departed loved one answered my question, gave me a response. So, like, here's a perfect example. Oh boy, we've got this funeral coming up. Well, should we do it outside or should we do it at the church? Mom wasn't that into the church at the end of her life, but a lot of her friends would show up if it was indoors, you know. And then then she describes her mother popping in her mind saying, "Do it in the church because all of our family members will feel more comfortable there, and it will be indoors and easier to organize." And then she says, "Oh, by the way, you'll want to seat these people here." So not only does the departed loved one come into the mind of the shared death experiencer who's now grieving and bereavement, but provides answers, responses to things that the surviving loved one is pondering and reflecting upon. And I got another great example. This is from Andrea. Andrea's husband died young in his late 20s of throat cancer. Very sad death. And she's driving in California. We have a big road called the 101. It runs along kind of close to, in some places, close to the Pacific coast. And so she's driving this beautiful road from, just up about half an hour, 45 minutes north of Santa Barbara, which is on the coast. And her husband has died about a week or two earlier. And she's driving down. She's realizing that, she's going by the off ramp where her deceased husband's parents live. And she thinks about her deceased parents. She goes, "Oh, well, I wonder if I should visit now, or I got to get downtown." And all of a sudden, her departed husband pops into her mind and says, "Visit now, go right now. They're available, and it'll be a good time for you to connect with them." So she gets off the road, she drives over there, she heeds the communication from her departed husband and goes and visits her mother and father-in-law. And they are indeed there. They are indeed available for her, and they welcome her, and they have a very meaningful conversation. And this conversation would not have happened, or this visit would not have happened, had she not been visited by her recently deceased husband. So that's what we call direct post-death communication. That only happens, in the first 3 months. It can happen once. It can happen a few times. It can happen regularly. And it can make the experiencer tends to describe this as, it's like we're still in relationship together, but I just sense and feel. I don't see the physical body, but we're still in relationship, deeply connected in relationship. But that tends to fade. It can fade rapidly. Mm-hmm. It can fade with a communication, "I need to be moving on now," or it can just fade without any explanation. But typically it's gone within the first few months. But there's another type of communication that happens, and this is called post-death visions and visitations. And this is frequently experienced this way, usually anytime within the first year, but usually I seem to find these within the first 6 months or so. There seems to be a predominance of this. The departed loved one will appear clear and younger, more vital, more attractive, almost like the best version of themselves, sometimes wearing a familiar outfit, and often appears at the foot of the bed or up towards the ceiling, suspended. And when that person appears, it does appear in the shape or form of a person, as if they were present and real. And they'll say, "Yes, it's me. I'm here." And they have a purpose to their visit. And the purpose to their visit is often, "You need to move on with your life. I love you. I'll be with you always. I'll see you again later, but you need to go on living your life." Or something like, "You need to work this out with your sister and brother," if there's something like some guidance. Or, "It wasn't your fault. if it was a tragic accident, it wasn't your fault, or it wasn't his fault, or this is what happened. So if there's some sort of tragic death, sometimes the recently deceased will come and provide helpful information that's healing. So,
Wow.
and then there's synchronicities as well, profound synchronicities. Which when I started studying synchronicities, I thought, oh my God, people are going to think I've gone off the deep end here. I've gone into woo-woo land. But some of the synchronicities are spectacular. I'll share one with you here and your viewers. There was a very well-known documentarian, a film documentarian. His name was Mike Degree. And he did a lot of things for the British Broadcasting Corporation and National Geographic. And he was a host of, kind of a wildlife program. And he just did lots of work with the nature, and he was an environmentalist and what have you. Well, he died suddenly in a helicopter crash in Australia. And at his funeral, his memorial, a week later, his brother was eulogizing him and said, describe Mike, his brother, as a human exclamation point. A human exclamation point means he lived with vigor and excitement and high energy. After the memorial, they walked down to the beach across the street. This is in Santa Barbara, beach town. They all stood on the beach and they had a ceremony honoring Mike. And in the sky above the water was a cloud formation that looked exactly like a human exclamation point. Looked exactly identical. It was a human exclamation point. That's a synchronicity that's undeniable. Everybody saw it, all 1,000 people. Mimi, his wife, who I worked with in grief and bereavement counseling, and she's fine that I share that because she wants this story to get out to the world to say this is what's possible. Thought initially that somebody had paid to have that exclamation point made in the clouds, but it was huge. I mean, it was huge. Later, she realized, wait a minute, how did that happen? And she was very scientific. So it was hard for her to stretch into that. But now she realizes that there's a force and power greater than we can know that acts in nature and creates these synchronicities. We have all sorts of synchronicities with birds and dogs and butterflies and, hummingbirds, you name it. We've got them, mammals. So we live on a coastal town. And sometimes I'll say to people in grief and bereavement, go walk along the beach and ask for your departed son to send you a sign. And maybe, send you a sign. And so she goes and walks. And this happens all the time. This is one of my most favorite interventions for people who say, I just want to know they're alive somewhere. Go to the beach. And then she's walking along the beach, and this happens all the time. All of a sudden, what happens is they come back a week later for their session and say, you're not going to believe this. Actually, I should say it more accurately. They don't just come back a week later. They call me from the beach on their cell phone and say, remember you asked me to go to the beach? I'm on the beach. I'm seeing dolphins jumping out, hundreds of dolphins. It's the biggest display of dolphins I've ever seen. I asked for a sign, and this is him. He's here. He's telling me he's alive and well. And I'm crying and I'm weeping. I can't believe this is happening. I walk this beach every day, and I've never seen this many dolphins. That happens frequently.
Wow. Yes, synchronicities are a huge topic. And I feel like once you open up to them, you will see and sense them everywhere. And one little personal story from my side regarding post-death visitations. This has been told by my mother. So her grandmother, when her husband passed away, woke up one night and she suddenly saw her deceased husband standing next to the bed. And I'm not sure what time frame that was. I would have loved to ask her myself, but at the point where I heard the story, she passed away herself already. So I couldn't talk to her directly. But from my mother, I knew that she was so in shock seeing him, not in his physical form, but he was there. And it scared her so much that she basically told him to go away. Like she was like, go away, go away. This was so shocking. And then he tried, I think, to talk to her, but realized that the fear is kicking in. So then he disappeared again. And when you hear someone from your family telling you stuff like this, you know, it's not just a case that you read. It's actually someone from the family. You start view these phenomena in a different way. I think even though these things are very intimate and private, they should come up to the surface because they may be more commonly than we think. If we once open up, you know, if all of us will share these kind of things, we will realize that they're maybe everywhere.
I love the story that you shared of your grandmother. Did you notice the way that it was similar to what I described as well as a post-death vision visitation? Right at the foot of the bed, usually a little elevated. They look real as real. I mean,
yeah.
But if you look closely, when I press people as we do in the interviews, they'll say, "Well, it was almost completely human, but there was a little bit of a thinness in it." But then again, I will say we also have people that will share that they wake up feeling embraced, like the departed loved one was in their bed, hugging them. They feel that. So these are profound experiences. And yes, Alexandra, I really appreciate your affirmation for these because our culture is skeptical. And yet, for anybody who studies these experiences as I do, I am quite skeptical. I mean, I was raised, in an Ivy League school, and we are very scientific materialists. But I got into this as a psychotherapist, and I had my own experiences, and I just said, wait a minute, this is too important to let go of. We need to study this. So, I just hope that more and more people will continue to study this, and there are great people doing it around the world. And I should say, in Europe, where Thanatos is from, there's a lot of great research happening. Peter Fenwick, who you've interviewed, your show has interviewed, is Pim von Lommel, all these great researchers. Michael Lamb's another one who did terminal lucidity. He's from Germany. So there's great work going on both sides of the Atlantic and around the world as well. I mean, I know people have taken our research that we published in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. They took those methods and have applied them now in Brazil and China, I think Taiwan rather than not mainland, and other parts of Europe. So this is going to continue. I think we're at the front end of a massive revolution in this type of communication around death and dying.
I absolutely agree. Before I come to my very last question, I would like to clarify one little thing. What is the difference between a shared death experience and a shared crossing experience?
Great. So the entire continuum of end-of-life experiences, I created a spectrum, a shared crossing spectrum of end-of-life experiences. So when we use shared crossings, we're talking about any experience that is an end-of-life experience that speaks to communication across the veil. So pre-death premonitions, pre-death visions, visitations, terminal lucidity, shared death experiences, and then the other post-death phenomena, direct post-death communication, post-death visions and visitations, and synchronicities throughout. Synchronicities can happen pre-death, at time of death, and post-death. So those are all shared crossing experiences. Rather than calling them end-of-life experiences, we just call them shared crossing experiences because it gives more descriptive language to the sharing of some experience across the veil. The shared death experience is one of those experiences that I've talked about. And in my mind, it's the pinnacle experience. It's the one that's the most mystical, it has the ability for just the most remarkable phenomena. But all the experiences can deliver the transformative value of, huge transformation. Just as the shared death experience has more kind of supernatural phenomena.
And speaking of shared crossing, as we already mentioned, you are the founder and executive director of the Shared Crossing Project. You have already described this project, but would you please sum up its purpose in a few sentences and for whom it might be very interesting?
Yeah. So, the mission of the Shared Crossing Project is to transform people's relationship to death and dying, end of life generally, through raising awareness and educating people about these profound shared crossings, these end of life experiences that teach us that death is an illusion, that the veil is far thinner than we know, that death is not to be feared. And part of our purpose and what we do in terms of programs is we offer programs to teach people how to have conscious, connected, and loving end-of-life experiences. And then we teach these methods for how people can have shared crossings. And we used to do most of these programs. Pre-COVID, we did most of them in person around the world, mostly in North America. But now we do them online, and we have participants from all over the world. That's what we do. And I should say that we have good resources on our website, and we have a shared crossing library. And that means you can go to this library and you can see firsthand reports of people sharing their shared death experiences and shared crossing experiences. They're fascinating. I think we have 8 or 9 up there right now. We try and change them regularly so we keep them updated. But you can see people sharing their own shared death experiences, and they're spectacular. And so it's a great resource, both for the general public, but sometimes a lot of healthcare providers, end-of-life workers, hospice workers, when their patients are asking about what's the best I can hope for in terms of being with my partner at the end of life or loved ones. And a lot of healthcare workers say, go to sharedcrossing.com and go look up the Shared Crossing library. So there's other information. We give definitions and videos and explanations for shared crossings. So it's a good place for resources.
I loved what you said. You said the veil is thinner than we think. And I think this sums it up perfectly. Yeah. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for your time. I loved this interview. It was amazing talking to you. And thank you for being with us here at Thanatos.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Alexandra. I really enjoyed our interview. I wanted to leave your listeners with one more thing, if I may. If you've had any type of shared crossing experience, as I know your listeners will have, please reach out to us at sharedcrossing.com. Go to the research section or just go to the contact page. If you go to our contact page, it'll say, do you have a story? Do you wish to share your story? And then it'll give you a prompt for how to share your story with us. And then our research team will review them and get back to you. Also, if you're interested in being a researcher, an intern with us, learning how to work with the project, collect cases, we have a research volunteer and internship program for people around the world, help us collect cases. And we're really trying to get more multicultural. We've been very focused in North America and Europe and Australia, New Zealand, Western countries, primarily English-speaking countries, but we're trying to extend even beyond that. Obviously, we want to figure out this phenomena, learn more. So we welcome your inquiry for the internship program as well. And that's it. So just thank you for your interest, and it's been a pleasure being with you. Alexandra, have a great day.
Thank you so much, William. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.